Before we begin, just a quick note. This video doesn't use horror footage or jump scares. Instead, I've kept it simple. Just real chilling stories and soft rain sounds in the background. Because sometimes, all it takes is a voice and your own imagination to feel fear. So if you're lying in bed, trying to sleep, just close your eyes, listen, and let the stories unfold. I still remember the exact moment when Aidan first pitched the idea. We were all sitting in his cramped little apartment, surrounded by camera equipment that looked like it had been scavenged from every thrift store in the city. Aidan, the unofficial leader of our little group, had always been obsessed with filmmaking, but not just any filmmaking. He wanted to make horror films, real ones, the kind that don't rely on cheap jump scares or flashy CGI, but on atmosphere, tension, and genuine fear. Aidan had no big studio backing, no fancy gear apart from a battered camera, some lights, and a couple of microphones. But he had passion, and that's what mattered to him most. He looked at us with that spark in his eyes and said, "Guys, I want to make a horror short film. Something that really freaks people out, but I need your help." It sounded simple enough at first. 4 friends, a camera, and a plan to create something scary. But as he explained, things got complicated. We need a location, somewhere real, somewhere creepy. I don't want to fake it in a studio or a backyard. We need to find an abandoned house. Something with history, maybe a dark past, something that will give us the real chills. That's when the excitement kicked in for all of us. We weren't just going to act scared. We were going to put ourselves right in the middle of the fear. But finding the perfect place was harder than we thought. We spent days searching online, checking forums for urban explorers, contacting people who knew about abandoned properties. Most places were either too close to the city or just too obvious. We wanted somewhere remote, somewhere that felt untouched, like time had forgotten it. Finally, after a lot of digging, Aidan found a listing for an old farmhouse near a small village called Ashmore, about 3 hours out of town. The pictures were grainy and old, but the house looked promising, creaky, weathered, and completely abandoned. No one had lived there for years. According to the listing, it had belonged to a family that mysteriously disappeared in 1998. There were rumors in the village about strange happenings, unexplained noises, and even some deaths. That was the moment we knew we had found our location. Our group was made up of 4 of us: Aidan, the filmmaker; Lila, his girlfriend; Mia, my childhood friend, who was always a bit more sensitive to creepy stuff; and me, Brandon, the skeptical one, always looking for a logical explanation. We all agreed to go, despite the warnings and the uneasy feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. The night before we left, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what kind of horrors awaited us in that house. Was it really haunted? Or was it just an old place with a tragic story? Either way, there was no backing out now. We packed our gear early the next morning. Aidan's camera was our main tool, but we also brought some extra batteries, flashlights, and our sleeping bags. No fancy effects, no crew, just us. Our dog, Shadow, was with us too. He was usually fearless, always curious about new places. But even he seemed uneasy that morning, refusing to get into the car at first, whimpering softly like he knew something was wrong. The drive to Ashmore was quiet. The road stretched out through endless fields and thick forests. The sun was bright but felt muted, like the sky was holding its breath. When we finally reached the village, everything felt frozen in time. The streets were empty, and the few houses we saw looked weathered and tired. The farmhouse sat at the edge of the village, partially hidden behind tall grass and twisted trees. It looked worse in person than in the photos. The paint was peeling, windows boarded up or broken, and the front porch sagged like it might collapse any second. We parked the car and stepped out. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the faint creak of the old house. Shadow growled low and refused to follow us inside. Aidan was the first to step up to the porch and push the door open. It creaked loudly, echoing through the empty rooms. Inside, dust hung thick in the air. The floorboards groaned under our feet, and the walls were stained with years of neglect. It smelled of damp wood, mold, and something else I couldn't place. Something metallic, like old blood. We started setting up our equipment quickly, eager to get started. Aidan wanted to capture everything raw. No scripts, no rehearsals, just real reactions. But as I looked around, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, as we gathered around a small fire outside, the house looming behind us like a sleeping monster, I told myself that it was just nerves. 4 friends. A simple project. How scary could it really get? But deep down, I already knew. The House of Dead was waiting. The first morning in Ashmore village greeted us with a strange kind of stillness. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that presses down on your chest, making each breath feel like a reminder that something is off. As the sun filtered through the cracked curtains of the old farmhouse, I realized none of us had slept well. We were 4 friends, yet none of us spoke much. Our thoughts tangled in the shadows left by the night. Aidan was already up, fiddling with his camera gear like it was the only thing that could save us from the creeping dread. He was usually the most energetic of us, always excited about the next shot, but even his smiles felt forced that morning. Lila sat at the rickety kitchen table, stirring her cold coffee, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Mia was nowhere to be seen, and I suspected she was outside, trying to find some semblance of normalcy away from the house's suffocating walls. And then there was Shadow, our dog. Normally lively and curious, he now avoided the farmhouse entirely, retreating behind the car or wandering into the thickets that surrounded the property. Whenever we called him, he growled low and refused to come. It was unlike him, like he sensed something we didn't. The house itself seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Every creak, every groan of the wood was a whispered warning. We had 4 days to film, 4 days to capture something real. But deep down, I feared we wouldn't last that long. Our first task was to scout the house for good shooting locations. The farmhouse was bigger than it appeared, with peeling wallpaper, shattered glass, and layers of dust covering everything. The living room had a grand fireplace, now filled with ashes and broken bricks. The kitchen was littered with rusted utensils and broken cabinets. Upstairs, narrow hallways led to small bedrooms, each with cracked windows and faded wallpaper. Aidan was fascinated. "This is perfect," he said, setting up his camera in the living room. "The kind of place people only see in nightmares." Lila forced a smile, but I caught the tremor in her hands. As we moved from room to room, the atmosphere thickened. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and cold spots seemed to follow us. Sometimes, I could swear I heard faint footsteps or whispering just beyond the edge of hearing. We tried to keep it light-hearted, joking about haunted houses and ghosts, but the laughter never reached our eyes. Shadow refused to come inside, barking sharply whenever we approached certain rooms. He growled most at the basement door. A heavy wooden slab nailed shut, but clearly old enough to be pried open. That door held the darkest secret. On our second day, things got worse. We decided to film some scenes outside to break the tension. The farmhouse was surrounded by thick woods, gnarled trees that twisted toward the sky like claws. Aidan was determined to capture the eerie landscape, his camera moving steadily through the underbrush. But the woods were silent in a way that didn't feel natural. No birdsong, no rustling of animals, only the crunch of our footsteps on dead leaves. Suddenly, Shadow bolted, disappearing into the thick forest without a sound. We called for him frantically, but he didn't respond. When we finally found him, he was standing at the edge of a small clearing, staring fixedly at something we couldn't see. His fur was bristled, and low growls rumbled from his throat. Lila tried to call him, but Shadow backed away, ears flattened, eyes wide with fear. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. That night, the noises inside the house began again. Soft whispers, scratching at the walls, footsteps pacing above our heads. Mia claimed she saw shadows moving just beyond the light of her flashlight. Aidan kept filming, pushing us to keep going, but even he couldn't hide the tension now. We were no longer just making a film. We were trapped inside a nightmare. That night in the farmhouse was the first time we truly felt that something was watching us. Not just the creaks of an old house settling or our imagination running wild. It was something far darker, something that shifted the air and chilled our bones. We gathered in the living room after a meager dinner, cold canned beans and stale bread. The flickering light from the oil lamp cast jittery shadows on the cracked walls, making the entire room look like it was breathing. Aidan was busy setting up his camera, determined to capture every moment, but even his usual enthusiasm seemed strained. Mia sat curled up on the worn sofa, eyes wide, whispering about strange noises she heard. Lila was nervously fiddling with her necklace, her fingers trembling. Shadow, our usually loyal dog, refused to enter the house. He stood growling low at the doorway, hackles raised, ears pinned back. As darkness deepened, the noises began. Soft thumps came from upstairs, like footsteps pacing slowly back and forth. When one of us called out, the footsteps stopped abruptly. A cold draft swept through the room, despite all windows being tightly shut. I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. A whisper, barely audible, seemed to float through the stale air. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice, or many voices. Suddenly, Lila gasped, pointing to a corner where the shadows seemed thicker, swirling as if alive. "Did you see that?" she whispered, voice trembling. None of us dared look directly. We tried to stay calm, joking nervously to mask our fear. But every creak, every flicker of the lamp, every shadow sent our hearts racing. Aidan insisted on filming the upstairs bedrooms next day, but I could see doubt flickering in his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the cold floor, listening. The house whispered secrets, scratching at walls, dragging sounds, low moans. Then I heard it. A soft sobbing from the basement. No one dared investigate. The basement door was nailed shut, covered in dust and cobwebs, yet the cries came from below, desperate and chilling. The dog growled viciously at the basement door, refusing to come near it. Even the bravest among us stayed clear. Mia admitted she saw a shadow figure standing by the doorway while she was brushing her teeth. It vanished when she blinked. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. By the third day, tension had reached its peak. One morning, I found Lila staring blankly at the wall, her eyes hollow, fingers twitching. She refused to speak about what she saw, but looked terrified. Shadows seemed to cling to her, whispering dark things. During a shoot in the dining room, the camera suddenly malfunctioned. The screen flickered, showing brief flashes of something moving behind us. When we turned, no one was there. Shadow was nowhere to be found again. That night, the house erupted in chaos. Screams echoed through the halls. Something slammed against the walls, and Mia vanished. We searched frantically but found no trace. Only 2 of us remained alive by dawn, broken, terrified, and desperate to escape. That morning, the sunrise did nothing to lift the oppressive weight pressing down on us. The stale air of the farmhouse had seeped into our bones. I woke up on the cold floor, my back aching and my mind racing. Aidan was already up, pacing near the broken window, his face pale and eyes hollow. "Did you hear that last night?" I asked him quietly. He didn't answer at first. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I think I saw something, or it saw me." We gathered in the kitchen, trying to eat something. Lila and Mia were still missing. Nowhere to be found. The house felt emptier, as if it was swallowing their presence whole. Shadow, our dog, wouldn't come inside. He paced near the front door, ears perked, growling low whenever the wind rattled the broken panes. Aidan was frantic, trying to review the footage from last night's filming. The camera was glitching, screens flickering with static and brief glimpses of dark shapes moving fast. "This isn't just some glitch," he muttered. "There's something wrong here." Suddenly we heard footsteps above us, heavy, slow, and deliberate. Not ours. They moved from the hallway to the attic and then stopped. The attic door creaked open. We froze. "Maybe it's Lila or Mia," Aidan suggested, hope tinged with fear. We climbed the creaky stairs, each step groaning under our weight. The attic was pitch black, filled with old furniture covered in sheets. A thick layer of dust coated everything, but something wasn't right. A cold breath brushed past my neck. I spun around. Nothing. Then, from the corner of the room, a whisper. "Leave." Lila screamed suddenly from behind me. She pointed to a shadow that flickered just beyond the beam of her flashlight. It twisted and turned, almost like a figure, but no face, just darkness. We ran down the stairs as the attic door slammed shut behind us, shaking the house. That day, we tried to leave, but the car wouldn't start. No matter what we tried, the engine refused to turn over. The air grew heavier and heavier. The sky darkened prematurely. An unnatural storm began to brew, the wind howling through the broken windows like a banshee. We were trapped. Shadow growled fiercely at the front door, as if warning us. The house had locked us in. Night fell like a curtain, bringing with it the worst of the horrors. The walls whispered, the floorboards groaned, and the shadows grew teeth. That night was unlike anything we had ever experienced before. The storm outside battered the house relentlessly, rain slashing against the broken windows like claws trying to tear us apart. Inside, the temperature dropped drastically, a biting cold seeping through the walls and into our bones. We huddled together in the living room, the flickering lantern casting grotesque shadows that danced menacingly across the peeling wallpaper. Shadow, usually our protector, was unnerved, his growls low and constant, hackles raised as he paced nervously between us and the front door. Every creak and whisper seemed magnified in the silence between the thunderclaps. Suddenly, a deafening bang echoed from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of something dragging itself along the floor. We froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding so loudly it felt like the walls themselves were shaking. Aidan gripped his camera tightly, whispering, "We have to see what's going on. This is our film. We can't just run." I wanted to argue, but the paralyzing fear rooted me to the spot. Lila took a shaky breath and whispered, "Maybe it's Mia or something. Maybe she's hurt." Summoning whatever courage we had left, the four of us, except Shadow, who refused to leave the safety of the ground floor, started up the stairs. Each step creaked like a gunshot in the silence, our flashlight beams cutting through the dense darkness. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before us, walls lined with faded portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow our every movement. The dragging sound had stopped. We moved cautiously towards the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, swaying slightly as if pushed by an invisible hand. Lila, her voice barely a whisper, said, "Should we go in?" Before we could answer, the door slammed open violently and a cold gust of wind swept past us, extinguishing our flashlights. Panic set in. In the pitch black, I felt something brush past me, a cold, clammy touch that made my skin crawl. A low growl echoed somewhere in the darkness, not from Shadow. Then came the screams. They weren't human. Not entirely. Something inhuman, twisted, and filled with rage. We stumbled down the stairs, blinded and terrified, until we reached the safety of the living room. But safety was an illusion. The house was alive, and it was hunting us. The panic didn't end when we reached the living room. If anything, it only deepened. The house seemed to breathe around us, walls pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, floorboards creaking beneath unseen footsteps. The air was thick, suffocating, and charged with a malevolent energy that gnawed at the edges of our sanity. Shadow whimpered in the corner, refusing to move. Even he sensed the growing darkness. Aidan was shaking as he fumbled with his camera, desperately trying to capture any evidence of what we were facing. "We have to keep filming," he stammered, voice barely steady. "This is real. We need proof." But I could barely focus. The weight of fear crushed me, my mind racing through every nightmare I'd ever had. Lila's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. And Mia, she was nowhere to be found. The dragging noise returned, louder this time, accompanied by low guttural growls echoing through the house. The shadows stretched longer and darker, twisting into grotesque shapes along the walls. Suddenly, a scream tore through the silence. It was Lila. We ran toward her voice, but before we could reach the hallway, the floor beneath us trembled violently, as if the house itself was shaking us off like insects. I lost my footing and fell hard, pain shooting up my arm. Aidan caught me just before I hit the ground. The room around us seemed to warp and twist, walls bending inward, shadows pooling at the edges of our vision. Lila's scream turned into a blood-curdling howl. We found her pinned against the wall by an unseen force, her eyes rolled back, lips moving in a silent chant. "Help me," she gasped, but her voice was hollow, distant. We tried to grab her, but the force held firm, growing stronger by the second. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. The house didn't just want us gone. It wanted us broken. We barely escaped that room, dragging Lila with us as her body convulsed uncontrollably. Outside the house, the storm raged harder, lightning splitting the sky as if the heavens themselves were warning us. Mia's disappearance, Lila's possession, and the house's relentless grip. It was all a twisted game, and we were the prey. The hours that followed were a blur of panic and desperate attempts to survive. Lila's condition worsened with every passing moment. Her body convulsed violently and she would mutter strange words in a language none of us recognized. Her eyes, once warm and familiar, now held a terrifying emptiness, black voids that seemed to swallow any light. Aidan was frantic, shouting for help we knew would never come. I tried to hold Lila steady, but her strength was gone. It felt like something else had taken over her, an ancient force that wasn't human. Shadow barked furiously at the shadows creeping along the walls, teeth bared but powerless. The dog, usually fearless, cowered beside me. Suddenly, from somewhere deep within the house, a chilling laughter echoed. It wasn't human. It was dark, mocking, filled with pure malice. Mia's absence was a constant, gnawing presence. We called her name, searched every corner, but there was only silence. Then, something moved. A figure emerged from the darkness. A silhouette, tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed faintly red. It hovered just beyond the reach of our flashlights, its presence sucking the warmth from the air. Aidan raised his camera, trying to capture it, but the figure vanished in an instant, leaving behind only a cold emptiness. We knew then. We weren't just trapped in an old house. We were prisoners of something far worse. Lila's screams shattered the silence again, and I realized with horror that the house's grip was tightening. There was no escape. By the fourth night, our strength was nearly gone. The house seemed to feed on our fear, growing stronger with every scream and every whispered prayer we made into the darkness. Aidan and I were the last ones standing. Lila was lost to whatever darkness had claimed her, her eyes vacant as she wandered the halls like a ghost. Mia, wherever she was, remained a haunting mystery. The storm outside had turned into a relentless nightmare. Thunder rattled the windows, and the wind screamed like the cries of 1,000 lost souls. We barricaded ourselves in what used to be the dining room, stacking broken furniture against the door. But even as we did, the walls themselves seemed to pulse and breathe, as if the house was alive and angry. Suddenly, the floor beneath us trembled, and a deep, guttural growl filled the air. From the corner of the room, shadowy tendrils began to creep along the walls, reaching towards us like hungry fingers. Aidan raised his camera in defiance, capturing everything, but his hands shook uncontrollably. "We have to get out," I whispered, heart pounding, "before it's too late." Before he could respond, a deafening crash came from the attic. The ceiling cracked and splintered, and a dark figure descended the stairs, tall, twisted, and dripping with shadows. Lila's voice echoed from somewhere in the house, a chilling chant that sent chills down my spine. The figure moved toward us, its eyes glowing with pure hatred. We ran. We burst through the back door into the pouring rain, the cold water soaking through our clothes as thunder roared above. But the nightmare wasn't over. Behind us, the house groaned, as if enraged by our escape. We knew we'd survived the night, but the house of dead had marked us, and it would come for us again. The cold rain washed over us as we stumbled down the muddy path away from that accursed house. Our clothes clung to our bodies, soaked and heavy, but it was nothing compared to the weight crushing our minds. Aidan's face was pale, eyes hollow and haunted. I could barely catch my breath, heart pounding in my chest like a wild drum. We didn't speak much. Words felt useless. Shadow stayed close, still trembling but loyal as ever. After what felt like hours, we finally reached the edge of the village. The few remaining villagers eyed us warily, whispering among themselves. It was as if they recognized the horror etched into our faces. An old man stepped forward, his voice gravelly and low. "That house, it's cursed. The family that lived there in '98, they died terrible deaths. Some say the house itself is alive, hungry for souls. We told him everything, desperate for answers. He nodded solemnly. You're lucky to be alive. Most who enter never leave. In the days that followed, Aidan and I tried to process what had happened. The nightmares came relentlessly. Visions of shadowy figures, ghostly whispers, and the anguished cries of Lila and Mia. Friends and family tried to help, but how do you explain the unexplainable? The police never found any trace of Lila or Mia. The house was demolished soon after, but that didn't stop the darkness. I still feel it sometimes. Cold drafts in my apartment, whispers when I'm alone, and the unshakable feeling that the house of dead is still watching. Months have passed since that nightmare in Ashmore, but some nights, when the world falls silent, I still hear the whispers, the ones that crawl through the cracks in the walls and coil around my mind like smoke. I try to live a normal life, but normal feels like a lie now. Every shadow in my apartment twists into something sinister. Every creak in the floor makes me jump. Sleep is a stranger I haven't seen in a long time. Aidan moved away soon after, said he couldn't face the memories. We still talk sometimes, but the silence between our words speaks volumes. Lila and Mia, they are gone, taken by something beyond understanding. Sometimes I wonder if the house of dead ever really lets go, if the darkness follows you, no matter how far you run. Last week, I found a small piece of broken glass on my doorstep. It looked like a shard from one of the house's shattered windows. I don't know if it's a warning or a reminder, but one thing is certain. Some houses are better left alone, because in the house of dead, the shadows never forget. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more chilling, true-to-life horror stories every single day, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We upload new videos daily to keep your nights filled with suspense and scares. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.